I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Join us in welcoming Becca Young Allen, who is a long-standing pioneer in creating fully functional alternatives to the business-as-usual lifestyle at the individual, family, and community building level. Help us welcome Becca Young Allen. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And I get to do two back-to-back episodes of the podcast today. One, if you've been watching each of the episodes as they've been posted, you'll know that I had the pleasure of having Becca Young Allen and her two daughters, Erica and Grace Martinson. And if you haven't seen that, well, just stop watching this and go watch that. It's just an extraordinary interview with these three women that representing an extraordinary family and their community in which they live. And it's if you're looking for inspiration in these troubled times, that would be a good place to start. So this second interview is Becca on her own. And I'm just really pleased to have you here, Becca. We've had a few conversations really in the past few months about the formulation of a few different projects, some of yours, some of mine, some of other people's that we happen to be in speaking with from time to time. And right now we're in March of 2020, and anybody who's alive at this time watching this podcast knows that the world is awash with drama, with extraordinary events that really any one of them in my lifetime would have been taking up the entire screen or the entire newspaper or the entire conversation wherever we are. And there are literally hundreds of that scale conversation piece going on around the world now. The one that, of course, is at the top of the heap in this moment and looks to be for quite some time is the coronavirus. And so, Becca, I was really happy that you and I could have this conversation because you've been so active in your community, not just in your family, as we just found out in the last interview, creating alternative ways of being together as a family and as a small community where you live in I believe it's rural Massachusetts. And the conversation started to turn toward how could we collectively shift our experience of these many troubling predicaments and toxic topics that consume the airwaves all day long. How can we shift ourselves and our own relationships and our own conversations to create something different than what the business as usual conversation tends to generate? And you've been active in that recently in your own community, not to mention the conversations that we're having about putting together some webinars, some extraordinary content coming y'all's way soon. We'll get to those topics later. Um, Becca, I really am hoping that you will lay out for us what you've been seeing, what you're seeing as a new possibility here, and how's that showing up with you in your life, in your projects, and in your community. So welcome here.
Thank you, Dean. Such a pleasure to sit with you again. Well, from the larger perspective, we know that there is a cascading series of, let's just call them mildly challenges that we're facing on the planet right now. Um, and I was always curious to see which one would bubble up to a way that really impacted all of us in a way that we can actually feel personally. Because, even when Australia is burning to the ground, it's so far away and it's so removed and it's another thing on the screen. When are we as Americans going to actually feel the impact of, um, well, our choices? And as humans, say, as well as our nation. And so it was curious to watch the beginning of Corona as it began to bloom in China and then began to spread, and now what's happening with Italy being completely shut down. And then watching all of these other countries respond to this and learning the arc of the virus in different countries and seeing some of the fairly predictable outcomes that could be coming soon to a theater near you, except it's your own hometown. And so I was just watching that, and then something kicked, and I said, okay, it's time to mobilize the community. I just feel it, and I put word out, calling a neighborhood resilience circle, and the intention of that was simply to come together and name it, like, hey, this may be coming to us as well. It probably is, if it's not already here. And how do we want to respond to this as a community? How do we want to respond to it as a group? Because, in our culture, I think one of the primary disease epidemics that we have is actually isolation and loneliness. Despite all of our doings, everyone is extremely lonely. And so I thought it very interesting and curious to me that the appropriate medicine for this virus is more isolation and separation. And I just found that to be very curious. And so I wanted to help us hold both the idea of isolation and the idea of connectedness and togetherness. And what I found was that it was like the soil was really fertile for this conversation, because of the wide penetrating awareness that this has on people in a visceral way. Like, people are tangibly like, I am concerned about my loved ones, I am concerned about myself, I'm concerned about my family, whatever. It's a personal concern. So it's like a window has opened for a much larger conversation about the cascading series of crises that are unfolding in the great die-off on the planet right now and the great transition that we're in right now. So to me, I see it as an opportunity, and I wanted to kind of grab that opportunity while it was fresh in everyone's minds. So I put out the first meeting, and I did it really fast, like within 4 days. And of course, everybody's so busy, and who could possibly come? And I had 12 people come to the first meeting, and then I held another one, and I had 26 people at the second meeting. And this is my neighborhood. I had maybe 3 people from other towns. This is all from a very, let's call it a 2-mile radius around my house. So a very high density of people that are willing to talk and engage. And of course, this is not built on, to be able to put a call out like this and have people show up. That's built on decades of relationship building here, and decades of connection, and decades of working together, playing together, joining together, walking together with these people. And I point that out because of our epidemic of isolation. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that connection and community is one of the most important things that we can be cultivating right now. kind of regardless of, in spite of a virus that says we have to stay separate and apart.
Right.
So I wanted to challenge a bunch of the ideas around the virus and try to frame it in a way that is an opportunity for us to come together, to perhaps create some new systems of response together, to feel our wovenness together, that we're not doing this alone, we're not thinking about it alone, we're not holding it alone. We can do that together. Yeah, so that's a little bit about how it began.
So let me just be clear. Is that that initial email broadcast or whatever way you reached out to people was specifically a response, your invitation to craft a response together
Yes,
to the coronavirus and all the news that is going on about it and the possible or the eventuality that something would be happening locally. And
yes,
so getting together to have a little lead time, to plan together, to look together, to figure out together how to face this.
yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly it.
Okay. So I do want to underscore you have an extraordinary history of building community. We've covered that in other conversations, other podcast episodes. You've been on summits that Carolyn Baker and I produced years ago, and you were then had years of track record of building these relationships and these connections, creating these networks. So really, you were able to reap the benefits of those years of connectedness and networking. And so I'm curious, sounds like a fairly aware group of people in the first place. I'm curious, what what did you find? What was the atmosphere? How much curiosity? How much fear? How many ideas? How many people um, kind of stopped in their tracks? I'm just trying to imagine possible reactions to this conversation. I'm curious if you'd share what you found when you all got together.
Yeah. Well, it's a very aware area,
Mm.
extremely. So, I mean, just the fact that people came, was remarkable. And I would say that there was the full spectrum. Everybody felt it to be a concern. There was no one that was in denial around um, unknown larger scale impact. Um, People understood concepts of the impacts that go beyond the health impacts, but the impacts of supply chain shutdown, the impacts of interrupted just-in-time delivery systems, which we are all so accustomed to, and all of our production is so dependent upon. We were able to talk about not just the virus itself, but all of the concentric rings of impact that are a part of this wave of disruption that are going through right now. And it's funny, in the first meeting, I learned from the first one to the second one, because in the first meeting I did notice that there was a lot of fear, especially in the population that is, honestly, older and male, and those that have had, previously compromised immune systems. Greater fear and concern around the more vulnerable of our population, less concern about real health for the young and healthy. That wasn't as much of an issue. It was more concern for those that are vulnerable in a health way. And those that are vulnerable beyond a health way. There was a lot of conversation in the second meeting about all of the impacts on Asian Americans right now and Asians around the world that are now receiving a uh, racist response of some form or another. So yeah, it was quite a wide spectrum. But there were a number of people naming that that they wish that climate change could evoke such a response.
Yeah. Well, that's something that you and I might just touch in on a little bit in the next wave of this, but I'm curious, in that second conversation where it was substantially different, it sounds like there was less fear, it was less focused in that direction. Can you talk a little bit about what did you come up with? What did start to surface in that room in terms of the atmosphere, both inner and outer atmosphere for people in their sharing, in their collaborating, and so on?
Yeah. Well, it was really beautiful. In the first, go around where everybody was saying their names and where they lived, I invited everyone to rate themselves 1 to 5 where they were on their fear scale right now. How are you feeling? And so that really opened up that dialogue right from the get-go for people to be able to express, I'm at a 5 of fear for my parents and the 1 for myself and, 2 for my community. And so so that was surfaced, which was really good. And we have a number of elders in the community that I'm so grateful for, and those who have been um, on the awakening journey for some time, including a lot of inner healing. And so there was a lot of modeling about good self-regulation and how to be in relationship to the parts of ourselves that are really afraid, that are scared. When that fear spikes, what do we do? That came in almost immediately just from, the others in the circle who, um, as one of the female elders was speaking, she said, in my decades of being alive, I've been through many fears in my life, and I've learned what it is to be in relationship with that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another. So that was beautiful, very grounding, and centering for everyone. Um, the other thing that I wanted to introduce to the group was a different framework for being in relationship to this virus that is, number one, acknowledging of it as an intelligent being, and that viruses have been a part of this earth for uh, 4 billion years or so, if not longer. And they are here as a part of a, you know, homeodynamic regulating function in a lot of ways for the earth. And and to think about our response to the virus instead of using the war language of the dominant paradigm of kill and eradicate, but how are we in prudent relationship with this being, this vast being that is connecting us one at a time by joining in our DNA strands. Um, so introducing the idea of a different way of being in relationship to it was one of the what felt like an important component. Um, on a practical level, people were very concerned with how are we going to take care of each other if there are those of us who are sick and need care and aren't able to provide it. How are we going to care for the elderly gentleman who is living alone and who is probably would be one of the ones that would be most susceptible? How are we going to respond as a community? Um, One of the things that I kind of did early on, I don't have it here, I should have brought it out, but as soon as I heard about this breaking, I wanted to know what would be the appropriate medicine for it, because one of the clear things that we're seeing in the other countries is that the medical structures will be very easily swamped by the number of people that will be coming in for care. And so it's prudent to think about what would our own care be for ourselves and what kind of medicines would be best to gather to have in response. And so I've been reading the works of Stephen Buhner, who is a incredible herbalist who has written many books on emergent viruses and also antibiotic resistant bacteria, and creating herbal protocols to respond to both of these current beings that are on the earth and what is our relationship with them. He's also written incredible books on herbal remedies for Lyme disease, and other things. I'm just a big fan. So I saw that there was an herbal company that had created his protocol. He put out a protocol for an herbal supplement that could be used to treat people that are suffering from corona. And so I bought a little sample of it. It was three 4-ounce bottles. It cost $125, and for my calculations, it would be about a week's dose of medicine for one person. And that just didn't feel right. That wasn't resilient enough for me at all, knowing, number one, that the population of people that live in our area are not well resourced financially necessarily, and that I wanted to have more medicine on hand.
Yeah.
So early on, I ordered bulk amounts of each one of the different ingredients. And so one of the projects that burst out of this community meeting is a subgroup. We have many herbalists that are in our community, a subgroup of 6 people that are going to take all of the bulk herbs that I just bought and make a large amount of medicine that we can distribute at a much lower cost to those that are most vulnerable in our community.
Wow.
So
Great.
yeah, that was a concrete, task. Another thing that we did, another area was communication, knowing that we're going to want to be in communication with each other, and that if we do go through a period of quarantining that's necessary, we'd like to be able to be in touch. So we're creating some kind of a, Google group list or to connect, to connect us. And then the other practical thing that we really discussed was making sure that everybody had on hand at least a month's supply of whatever you need, food, whatever medicines that are your regular medicines, water, but really more food and medicine, and anything else that you would need, supplies, any other supplies that you would use over a month's time should you need to stay home and not being out in public, not going to
Right.
stores. So that was also discussed, and we were kind of sharing ideas and who has what, and so that was another area of conversation was making sure that everyone was individually resilient to be able to handle some kind of quarantining period, and for those with more that would have more, encouraged to have that to be able to share with those who have less.
What does it look like for this community and the group that got together for either or both of these meetings? Will you have more meetings out into the coming weeks and months? How's it looking for that?
That's a great question. I don't know. It's kind of unfolding in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
The medicine team is meeting to make the medicines, so that's going to be happening. And I imagine we're going to have a number of communications that are going out electronically. But I actually just had a little flash of that yesterday, was having everyone standing in a circle in my yard. So I do think we will be having another one.
There's a piece of what you're sharing that sparked a memory for me of a local to where I am in Southern Oregon. I'm sure there are programs like this across the country and around the world. I'm just aware of the one that's here. It's called CERT, Community Emergency Reaction Team,
Okay.
or
Well, yeah.
response team.
Yeah.
Response team. And that's something that's a series of classes that anyone from the community can go to the local fire station where they have a classroom and they'll do, I don't know if it's 10 sessions over a couple of months. It's quite an extensive program. And the piece of that program that was sparked by what you were sharing was that one of the elements of the CERT program is to know your neighbors, know your neighborhood, and know who might need some help.
Mhm.
And let's just say the electricity goes out. Who would need what?
Yeah.
Um, who doesn't have regular transportation? They just knowing enough about your neighbors to
Mhm.
know what are the items, what are the areas of uh, possible assistance that any given person, any given block in the neighborhood might have, and who would know to give so and so a call if you haven't seen him walking his dog in the past couple of days. That kind of a thing. Any way to stay connected and to know who needs assistance in any of a number of different um, possible emergencies that could happen.
Mhm.
So I know that that's a slightly different, perhaps a more elaborate program, but I'm curious, is there that kind of interweaving of people kind of being in touch and keeping an eye out for each other that way?
Yes, definitely. That was, one of the first issues that we were grappling with, were how are we going to take care of the most vulnerable in our population. So
Yeah,
yes, and again, it's a blessing that this community has such a strong tie with itself and each other, because we know each other. And so we know that. But, if we're all living in our isolated neighborhoods, apartment buildings, suburban landscapes where we don't know each other,
yeah,
this is when response to whatever the disruption is. Right now it's Corona. It will be many other things to come, but right now it's Corona. When we don't know our neighbors, when we're not in relationship in any way to our neighbors, it's so much easier when we have a little bit of foundation to stand on with each other than
mhm,
if we're just meeting for the first time.
yeah,
Although I have a great faith in humanity and our capacity to come together in times of trouble, um, that has been seen repeatedly through various wars. People know how to come together,
yeah.
and um, and many divides fall in the face of crisis. So may that be so in this case and in the future.
Well, given that optimistic trend in you, and you and I have connected recently about this very conversation, is this a good time to shift gears slightly and start to look at what we are collaborating on, and some really expand on what you were just talking about?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Um, Truthfully, this conversation started a while back for me, and I just started to have this kind of discomfort of being a part of the podcast world, and especially in this particular branch of the podcast world that is sometimes called the doomosphere,
Mhm.
where people we have a tendency to focus on the larger issues in our world, which all tend to fit in well into the doom category. Whether you're talking about political just hell that is going on around the world, and the discord and so on, or if you're talking about any of a number of environmental um, predicaments that are going on, and of course climate change. Uh, what I noticed quite a while ago, at least a couple of years ago, I became very uncomfortable with the what appeared to be almost an addiction for people, and I can speak for myself here, I noticed an addiction to wanting to get my daily hit of the next layer of information about how screwed we are, how bad it is, how bad people are, and whether particularly the bad people part tended to happen for me a lot in the political conversations, but it's all of a piece. This addiction to what I've seen in myself and seen in others as I've grown and lived through these past couple of years is I needed to get a hit so that I could be certain of something, even if it's that I'm certain how screwed we are. That dose of certainty of there was some addicted and kind of pathological part of me that was finding some relief in that, some twisted relief in being able to be certain about how screwed we were. And really that started to turn into a shifting of the focus of my body of work. And primarily here in the Poetry of Predicament podcast, I just got sick of having conversations about how screwed we are. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's a conversation. Okay, yeah, I got it already. And it keeps getting worse and it's coming faster.
Yes.
So what has become very alive for me in our recent conversations and others is there, it's sometimes called transformational resilience. So if the usual conversation that we might have that involves the word resilience, which is quite common these days, that's part of the good news is that at least it's common parlance now. But really, resilience means for the in the average definition to be knocked down or knocked off track or knocked off of normal, and then to somehow pick oneself up and get back into normal again. So the definition is somewhere in that vicinity. With transformational resilience, particularly with a guy named Bob Doppelt, who wrote a brilliant book of the same name, he started to put out a different caliber of definition of resilience, transformational resilience, and that is to instead of just enduring or surviving a particular traumatic event or great stressor, what if it were possible to learn and possibly grow and possibly even thrive in the midst of the stressor? So that's transformational resilience, and that's what started me on that track, and that's the kind of thing that really sparked up for me when you started to speak about what you're seeing as a possibility these days, and particularly as you laid out for us, what if this coronavirus, this global event that is serious and extraordinary, what if there are gifts in it? What if there's a way to transform our framing of this experience into something which could promote our growth, perhaps a different way of relating? So let me just stop there. I wanted to give people a kind of a sense of a continuum from the back at the beginning and the early stages of approaching the doom-filled world and that perspective, and to get it to where maybe there's a different way. I'm wondering if you're sparked to share anything out of what I've just been saying.
Yes. I just have to take one note here. Yeah. So, well, one thing I want to refer to, it's interesting how the culture uses shaming language to make ideas wrong. And so just the idea of doomer as like, oh, that's fringe or weird. It's like, hello, folks. Is anybody looking at what's happening? I mean, this is not doom as if it's just some dark perspective. This is, and I would just prefer to use what it really is, which is death. This is a great period of death that we're in. And that is super uncomfortable for people. And um, and yet it is so. And so I want to weave that the true death that is happening. You know, again, Corona is just one wave. This is just one wave of a larger, um, well, extinction, of course, but death of many, many things. Death of old ways of being. Death of old beliefs. Um, the death that is required. It's required for that transformational resilience, on an internal level. Like, we can't skip this part, everybody. Like, this is where we are. We're at this stage now. And the beauty of transformational resilience is that it emphasizes the power of our sovereignty to choose how to be in relationship with what is.
Mm-hmm.
We can be in denial, that's fine. We can be in denial all the way up until the water is lapping at the door of the house, or whatever the current issue is. That's fine. And then in that moment, you'll have that opportunity to shift your perspective. But we right now have this opportunity with these many, uh, I'll call them shots over the bow right now, that are warnings, like, yes, 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 we must attend to this, we must attend to this right now. And one of the most important areas of attention is internal, because how are we going to be able to emotionally handle the waves that are here and that are coming, um, you know, during these early waves, and I consider Corona to be an early wave. What can we learn in this stage of things that will be helpful for us no matter what happens in the future, no matter what goes forward? It will be helpful for us because it will help us connect more deeply to ourselves and to each other. And that is good medicine no matter what happens going forward. So yes, if we are willing to take responsibility here, if you're willing to look death in the face, if we are willing to say yes to what is happening, yes, and how can we grow? How can we evolve? How can we choose new ways?
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously we can fall back into the old patterns without thinking. That's the default. In order to step into something that isn't default, it takes a little energy. We have to build some new neural pathways, you know, and that takes a different kind of focus. So to me, these are great opportunities. They're window opening opportunities into our very busy lives, because even without this latest wave of corona disruption, people's lives are already massively complex, massively stressed, filled with anxiety, filled with all sorts of really hard things that it's hard to stay on top of as it is. And what, you want me to just come and now, you know, deal consciously with this new wave that's coming? So I really, you know, I feel for us all, and I do think it's an opportunity. And
Mm-hmm.
that's my hope in our offering together, Dean, is that we can take people on a bit of a path, um, through some various gateways of that opportunity together.
Yeah. Yeah, what Becca's just talking about right there is something that we're formulating literally just in the past couple of days. It just seems like, and I'm thinking back to the last interview that we did with your daughters, Becca. There was one question about what is the calling of these times, and if I look with you and me as we're having this conversation right now, it just seems like there's a bright light being shined on the calling for coming together in a way that we've almost, it looks like we've almost forgotten how to do this collectively, you know, outside of your neighborhood, I should say. And so here's an opportunity for us both individually and collectively to build some skills, to expand our capacity to be present both together and individually in the face of larger and larger stressors. And in my experience, that takes work. That's not something that is just intuitive. I just pull it out of my pocket. It's something to do work together on. I remember a conversation last year with futurist human systems designer Joe Brewer, and I asked him if a person who wants to live in this remarkable new possibility community that you're talking about, that you're designing, how would a person best be prepared to come and participate in this remarkable community you're wanting to design, Joe? And his response was almost immediate, and he said they would need advanced self-regulation skills and psychological flexibility. So we're not going to get to the psychological flexibility part of the conversation today, and it is a worthy conversation, and we will. But the thing that I think is a good fit for what you started us talking about today, what you were asking of the community to self-regulate and co-regulate as you were collaborating, as you were planning together to face this stressor. It's an extraordinary conversation and it's an extraordinary skill set. And I've been finding in my many conversations about this stuff that's going on in the world that particularly in the USA, it's not a strong suit. It's an extraordinarily weak suit in the USA to have a strong skill set with regard to self-regulation, to be able to bring myself back to an optimal state after being taken into or taking myself into a stress state, possibly for the whole vast majority of my day.
Or life.
Maybe, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a brief respite of a few moments to self-regulate. And so what I'm hearing us both getting toward in our mentions of this collaboration that you and I have been starting to put our attention on is what would it take to put out some really valuable practical information about self-regulation, about the very advanced self-regulation that Joe Brewer was talking about. What if we were to start to offer some co-regulation, some ways to regulate together, to bring ourselves to an optimal state of being while, no matter what the circumstances are. It's an extraordinary challenge. And I'm hard pressed to think of anything more important to be doing in these times.
Yeah. Yeah, because learning that kind of regulation, that kind of grounded self within this body here now, um, that's helpful no matter what life feels out.
Yeah.
You don't need the entire world to collapse for self-regulation to be a really useful thing. It's going to be immediately helpful in your family, in your relationships, in your job, in your day-to-day life. So it's such a widely important thing, almost regardless of what's happening in the outside world. But when we're looking directly at what is happening in the outside world and what, as the rumbling foundation continues to be shaken under our feet, it's going to become more and more essential, because without that self-regulation, what we're going to see is people losing their minds, frankly.
Yeah.
Just going out of their minds, as we see with all of the mass shootings that are happening. um, that's obviously very extreme, but we're all on somewhere on that bell curve, and
Yeah.
that may be an extreme, but we are all we're all there. And yeah, so I think that it's really important. And I just love the idea of weaving together um, inner and outer uh, regulation and
Yeah.
co-regulation.
And inner and outer preparation. That's something that, having gone to one of the seminars that you and Chris put on for so many years, um, you both have done so much work in the real, tangible, no kidding, outer preparations and outer um, construct of an alternative way of living.
Yeah.
And it takes, I mean, I'm not trying to tell you anything, but I know it takes work. The folks who think they want to just go back to the land and everything will be cool.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, my experience is finding people who get a big dream about that and they jump into it and don't have any clue how much work it is. So there's the outer preparations of someone who's choosing an entirely alternative way of living.
Mhm.
Back from that, for those of us who are still very much engaged in the business as usual world, there is an outer preparation. There, I mean, no kidding.
Oh,
There,
yes.
even
It's highly recommended.
even our very crippled and distorted CDC is recommending stock up, folks. Get yourselves ready. Make sure you've got yourself set for what could be a self-imposed. What's the word I'm looking for? That when I'm set myself away from the public,
Quarantine?
quarantine. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. But so there are preparations at that scale in this conversation, and I think really where my um, the depth of my interest is primarily in the inner preparations, and I I'm very much in the same camp that you were just pointing at, of as a as a culture, especially in the USA, we we've been running at far too fast a pace and overriding virtually every one of the core skills or capacities that we would need at a time like this, that we would use for self-regulation and co-regulation. So I'm really excited to be building that conversation out with you, and to be looking at offering that up in a series of webinars, and uh, there'll be a live component, and lots of support media for people who want to do a deep dive into any of the topics that we bring up. Um, I think it's an extraordinarily important set of skills and capacities that we're wanting to offer up.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wish it could be like Neo in the Matrix, where you plug in and learn jujitsu. I wish we could do that in people's bodies and just plug in and just insert self-regulation. And the problem is that as a species and as a culture and as individual humans, we are massively traumatized. And so, the reality is that this is not occurring to us in a vacuum in our bodies. This is occurring to us in the bodies that also store the traumas of our lives. And so it's not just about what's happening now, it's about what gets stimulated in here by what's happening now. And so that's that component of uh, healing work is so key in the self-regulation. And I would say also just a lot of generosity towards self, a lot of patience and love towards self in this process, because it doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice of falling off and coming back to center, falling off and coming back to center. thousands of times, really. And it's that practice of coming back to center just over and over and over, that really helps. Number one, develop a trusting relationship with the body, and number two, begin to build a little bit of a foundation of that capacity of knowing, like, even if I get knocked out, even if I really lose my mind over something, I can breathe. I can know to breathe. I can know to notice my thoughts. I can know to welcome what I'm feeling, what's happening in my great state of whatever it is, anxiety, sadness, grief, rage, whatever. And and then come back to center. Come back to center. So, it's my hope in this process, Dean, as we go through the unpacking of um, internal and external preparation for a beautifully unknown world in a time of great chaos, in a time of a great die-off, in a time of a great turning, that we'll be able to, just provide a journey that folks can come along on, um, and really get some concrete skills internally and concrete ideas externally for what is really prudent preparation right now. I it's beyond time, but that doesn't mean that there isn't time.
Yeah.
But it is time now.
Yeah.
It's time now. We just can't wait anymore. It's time now. We have to use these opportunities, like this wave of the coronavirus coming through, to kind of like wake up from the um, the what do we want to call it? It's kind of like I don't want to call it a stupor because that sounds a little too negative, but like it's a daze, the days of our lives.
Nice. Okay.
Hilarious, right?
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
DAZE of our lives is that, like, get up, go to work, come home, watch TV, make dinner, go to bed. Get up, go to work, come home, watch TV, go to bed. Get up, just that hamster wheel. These times like now are opportunities to kind of wake up out of that place of habitual living, in order to use that energy, and it could be the energy of fear, used to activate towards creating the time and energy to learn these self-regulation tools and learn these external preparation practices.
Yeah.
So again, it's an opportunity if we take it. And so this is an invitation to those who want to take the opportunity and make, how can we harvest the greatest wisdom? How can we gain the greatest learning out of whatever happens in our lives? And right now we have a happening. And so how can we use this beautiful opportunity to really expand into the next iteration of ourselves?
Yeah. Well, Becca, thank you for sharing about the community meeting that you are meeting that you recently been putting on, and thank you so much for the collaboration that we're starting to do to put together this offering we've been talking about right now. And of course, on the screen is going to be all the information, all the name and address and contact information and how to sign up and what's involved about this programmatic offering that we've been talking about, and also in the show notes, and then also, of course, on the website of livingresilience.net. So if any of this has piqued your interest, please come and join us on this series of remarkable sessions of self and co-regulation, of strong relationship building in this time when it's more needed than ever. Um, really look forward to an extraordinary, truly a webinar in seminar form of bring what you do, bring how you resource yourself, how do you self-regulate, how do you co-regulate with the people that you love and the people in your community, this will be an extraordinary opportunity to share and to build out these skills for each of us at whatever level we are at.
I look forward to it, Dean. It's a wonderful opportunity.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.